World of Warcraft, the classic high fantasy RPG that's coming up on its 20th anniversary. I'm Dracaria, and this series is going to be a calmer one than the stuff that usually goes up on this channel. World of Warcraft is one of my favorite games, and I do play it fairly regularly, so this is just another excuse for me to play it even more. I'm also an altaholic, so this is also an excuse for me to level yet another character. This series will be about questing, going through old zones, re-experiencing old storylines, and sharing some nostalgic story times from my years playing this game. So I am going to start with a Blood Elf because they are my favorite race, and I'm also going to be a rogue. Rogue is my favorite class, and it has the most nostalgia for me, and I just generally find it the most fun to play. But the question is, what do I want her to look like? I have quite a few different looking Blood Elves throughout my account, so I'm going to try to pick appearances that I don't use as much. I usually stick with the 4 through 10 range, so she would be either super pale or super dark. I'm going to avoid using the more yellowish tones, but I'm not really feeling the pale skin, so I think I'll go darkest. Now the face. There's a few faces that I typically gravitate towards. All of these are good. I don't think there's a single one here that I've never used, but I kind of like the way 3 looks. I think that's a cute one for her. Now hairstyle. There's so many to choose from. See, I haven't really used the pixie cut, I don't think. Tiara is cute too, but I think I like the pixie cut for this character so far. And as for the color, I think I want to stick with something pale. I could go light lavender, because I do like the way this platinum blonde looks, but the lavender is just so cute. And eye color. I do kind of really like the way these sapphire eyes look on her. They definitely stand out, and I think they complement her hair pretty well. Now the ears. I've actually become a really big fan of the medium ears, but I'm not sure. Long doesn't really look right. I might actually go short. I think the short ones do balance out her shape better. As for the earrings, I like both of these hoops. I think I like the small ones a little bit more. I really like the way the big hoops look though, but the small ones are more balanced. And I'm gonna go with silver jewelry, since the gold is very bright. I've always liked silver as the complementary color more than gold. Okay, and now it's just her name. So when I first started playing, I would sit here for 5 to 15 minutes just thinking of a fantasy sounding name. Unfortunately, the game has been around so long that any name you can think of is pretty much taken already. So these days, I typically just randomize it and play around with the spelling. If I see one that catches my eye, like this one, we can drop the Diro and just make it Dralina, and that one is available, so that's perfect already. And of course I'm going to start with Sunstrider Isle so we can get the full Blood Elf story.
The past few years have seen unprecedented changes within the eternal land of Quel'Thalas. The Blood Elves, following the will of their crazed leader Kael'thas Sunstrider, channeled dangerous, chaotic magics to transform their sacred Sunwell into a gateway of unspeakable evil. While Kael'thas and his demonic masters were eventually defeated, a different kind of transformation occurred within the Sunwell itself, as a dying Naru sacrificed its life essence to reignite the Sunwell into a fount of holy energy. Now, the Blood Elf regent Lorthamar Theron sees a new hope on the horizon for his people. Over time, the Sunwell's light could cure the Blood Elves of their cursed state, but many still cling to the arcane powers they've procured and are hesitant to relinquish them. As one of the remaining Blood Elves, you must fight to protect Quel'Thalas and help redeem the soul of your ancient people.
Alright, this UI is looking rough, so I am going to need to reset that. Much better. And I am doing this on a realm I've never played before, so I don't have any gold, I don't have any extra bags. I do technically have heirlooms, but I won't be using them unless I need them to kill a very powerful enemy. It'll stop things from going by too quickly, and things are still going to die fairly fast anyway. So, right off the bat, God, one of the first memories I have of being a blood elf was obviously in this very spot, but there was always, I remember I started in Cataclysm, and back then there was always a group of blood elves here, just hanging out, talking, joking around, and meeting new people and making friends to quest with. Obviously that doesn't happen as much anymore, but I have lots of memories of really just hanging out around this very quest giver and talking to people, just logging in and instantly seeing an entire conversation taking place between level 1 and level 2 blood elves who were more here for the socialization than anything else. And there were a lot more new players back then, so everyone was trying to get to know everyone. And there were a lot of silly little roleplays that would happen here too. I'm sure a lot of us were teenagers back then, I know I was. So it was something that made the world feel really alive at the time that I started playing. And I'm really grateful for that because a Blood Elf was not my first character, but it was the first character that I made friends on. And this is the first place where I found people to actually talk to and make the game more social. So I have to say that has to be one of the contributing factors to my nostalgia with Blood Elves. Even though it wasn't the first, it was the most important in the start of my journey through loving this game. But let's go ahead and start the actual questing process, get to the fun stuff. The sooner you begin your education, Drelina, the better for us all. There is little room for error, so listen closely. The burning crystals, the green floating objects to the west of the Sunspire here, have long been used to power the Isle's experimentations. The mana wyrms were their guardians, but the scourge invasion of Quel'Thalas has driven them errant from our lack of magical control over them. There is little choice but to thin their numbers for reclamation. Do this, then return to me. So we gotta kill the poor little mana wyrms. These little guys are definitely core components of Blood Elf lore. I remember this was one of my first instances, besides my experience playing D&D, where I played characters and I saw stories centered around characters that were morally ambiguous as the Blood Elves are. They're definitely painted in a more neutral light than a lot of the other races, and especially compared to the first race I ever played, they had a lot more questionable morals, their dependence on arcane energy being one of them, because they do sometimes absorb these guys to satiate their hunger for arcane magic, which seems harsh, but it probably contributed a little more to my interest in stories and characters who aren't afraid to be morally ambiguous, and who have questionable qualities about them that make you wonder if they really are good people, or where their tendencies will take them. I can appreciate that, and I like that they did that with the Blood Elves. You have successfully completed your first task. For that, you are to be congratulated. Such success gives me faith that you will turn out better than those young Blood Elves who fail to heed the lessons of their masters. Continued success will be rewarded, not only with knowledge, but also with tangible rewards as well. Your work here, however, is not finished. There is much more to learn, my young friend.
Keep your wits about you.
And we're level 2 already. You definitely level a lot faster these days than you used to. I'm not upset about it though, it'll keep things from getting too difficult, because this will be a pretty casual questing experience, so I don't mind if things aren't too hard. Your effort has made something clear that, honestly, I wish were not true. The unchecked power of the burning crystals has maligned a much larger swath of the Isle's natural balance than I thought. We must now take on more unfortunate measures to reclaim control. The nearby lynxes have succumbed to the influence of the crystals, and they must be put down. Bring their collars, Derlina, as I may yet be able to fashion a magical restraint to turn some back from being uncontrolled. Sure thing. Those gloves are not an upgrade, but that's fine. I do have to mention how detailed the starter armor is now compared to what it was back when I first started playing. Back then it was much more generic and pretty much based on your race more than your class. But I don't mind this. There is the nostalgia factor with the simpler armor designs, but I think these ones are nice too. They put a lot of effort and detail into these armor sets, and I have to appreciate that. Honestly, I don't have as much nostalgia for these quests as I do just being here and the social experiences that I had being a young blood elf. The quests don't really stick out to me as anything special, but this space down here is especially nostalgic for me, because I remember as low-level blood elves, we would come down here, and this is one of the spots. There's a couple others, but this is one of the spots where we would just hang out, dance, have little picnics and role play. I have to say, experiences like that is probably what hooked me to this game, because I liked it enough on its own, but I really only played it as I did because it was free. I would not have paid for the game back then if I didn't meet a lot of the people I did here, because I didn't get into World of Warcraft on my own. I was recommended to play by a friend, and they started the game playing with me, but eventually we kind of broke off, and once they weren't playing with me anymore, then I didn't have as many reasons to come back to it, but I decided to try out Blood Elf, and thankfully there were people here who made the game fun enough and intriguing enough that I decided to stick around, and it actually led to me meeting a lot of people, getting into a really good guild that I had a deep sense of community with, and kept me coming back enough times that I started to really love it. It gives me no pleasure to ask you to destroy these beasts. While in times past we have lived in relative harmony with woodland creatures, these are different times. The first order of business for all Sunstrider is survival. Make sure you remember that. Oh, I will. Especially being a rogue, survival is the most important thing. And speaking of survival as a rogue, that actually reminds me that a rogue was not my first choice for class, even as a blood elf. My first choice was warrior, and I intended on making that my main class. I did end up enjoying how strong warriors were and how durable they were, and I was actually hesitant to even make a rogue in the first place, because back then, rogues were known for being squishy, much like mages. They couldn't really take a hit, and I also knew that they were difficult to master. They were not very straightforward, like warriors or paladins. They had a lot more nuance to their class, and it was a lot harder to master a rogue's rotation. It still is, but back then it was a little shaky on whether I would even enjoy that class. But one of the friends that I actually made here in this starting zone eventually convinced me to try it, and as I leveled up, it was alright. I didn't really love it at first, but by the time I hit max level for a starter account, which was 20 back then, I actually realized that I really, really enjoyed it. And I ended up sort of just passively playing that rogue more than my warrior, to the point where rogue did end up becoming my main. It became my favorite, and it's still my favorite. And it's funny now to look back and think that I was so against even making a rogue in the first place, because I didn't think that I would even play it that much. I liked my warrior and I wanted to make that my main, but I ended up really loving rogue, and I don't know if that would have happened if my friend from back then hadn't convinced me to try it. It's hard to say. I might have tried it at one point on my own, but he actually was the catalyst for that happening. And who knows if rogue would have ever been my main if he hadn't convinced me. So it's little things like that that I still have to be grateful for. Because out of all the classes, and I've tried them all at least once, Rogue always comes back as the only one that I'm truly passionate about. I love the way it plays, I love the speed, and over the years I got really, really good at, if not mastering, then at least pinning down the rotation. And I'll save the bigger story of this point for later, but I actually became a pretty good, well-known rogue at a time when rogues were considered kind of a shitty class and not considered worthy of bringing to raids. It's funny how things unfold like that. The tower and surrounding areas should now be relatively secure, though only for the time being. You have done well in providing us with a buffer of security, but we will need to reassert control over the entire Isle if we are to survive here in the long run. This will involve tackling much greater threats than errant manawyrms and lynxes. Take this, Drillina. You will no doubt make good use of it for the tasks to come. I won't, because it's no better than what I have, but thanks. And now we're level 3. You are to report to my assistant, Lanthan Paralon. He will instruct you on what needs to be done next. While we here at the Sunspire will continue to rein in the burning crystals, you will be focused on a more pressing matter concerning Falthrian Academy. Lanthan will explain fully when you speak to him. Simply walk west of here along the path and you should see him standing close by. Good luck, Drillina. Your continued successes shall be rewarded. Alright, and that's it for Magistrix Arona.